hit the record.
Okay.
Okay. So hello everyone. Welcome to today's short talk seminars. We have this interdisciplinary talk series from lots of our collaborators to tell you about interdisciplinary research. And today we have invited Dr. Takahiro Yabe here to talk about, I believe it's his latest, like just published 2 weeks ago, latest research in behavior change during the pandemic. So without further ado, let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Joshing. Thank you everyone for coming to the virtual talk. I'm really excited to be with you and discussing the content. So please let me know if you have any questions during the way. I'm happy to answer any questions along my talk. So yeah, as Joshing mentioned, I'll be talking really briefly about what we did in the newest paper that we published, I think, a couple of weeks ago, on how to understand the impact of behavioral changes during the pandemic and how that decreased the type, the quantity, and also the quality of the encounters that you have in streets or in cities. And yeah, this is a work done with collaborators at the Media Lab at MIT. So just to kind of motivate the question, I'm sure many of you have seen this paper by Raj Chetty and others from Harvard, looking at what decides whether a person born in a low-income household, what's the deciding factor of that person to make it when they're older. And what they found was that it's not really, of course, half of the economic mobility, if you will, can be explained by where they are born and what kind of schools they go to, things like that. But also the other half, the remainder, can be explained by what kind of connections you have. And they used data from Facebook, looking at the percentage of the rich friends, the high income friends that you have on Facebook. And there seemed to be a really high predictability by using that sole metric. So this really strongly motivates us to look more about not just where you live, where you work, but also who you encounter in cities. And just to kind of add on to that, we have seen many studies from mainly social science, looking at the importance of these urban encounters that occur in cities. And apparently, according to more work, 30% of all your friendship ties are added from people who randomly visit the same place, like a cafe, bar, things like restaurant, things like that. There's prior work showing that it has economic impacts as well. So you can explain a lot of the variance in economic development by the social networks and social diversity of the social networks that regions have. Currently, we're undergoing a research looking at the association between the urban encounters and economic mobility, which Raj Chetty et al. Used. And we're seeing really strong signals. And also it's important for disaster recovery, which I used to work on during my PhD. So the question was, how did the pandemic affect who we meet in cities? And luckily we have, I think, as many of you know, access to a lot of data, including the one that I'll be using today or showing you today will be GPS location data collected from smartphones. Other things include social media data, like you saw the Facebook data set. We've been using some of the web search data as well. So what people browse on the website or on smartphones. And also some studies have used credit card transaction data. So just to kind of motivate why we want to look at these GPS location data, not just where they live. On average, a person travels, maybe this is larger in Texas, a larger distance to any kind of place from home. In Boston, this is around 5 to 6 kilometers from your home to any place like restaurant, cafe. But I assume that the national average is 9.5 kilometers and it's much longer. So most of the people don't really spend much of their time in their local census tract or zip code. And as a result, more than 75% of the people you encounter in cities live more than 15 kilometers away from you. So if you just look at the American Community Survey, the income maps, that doesn't really tell you who you're going to meet. So here we use human behavior data. We call it, this is actually GPS location data of around 3 to 5% of the population. It's quite spatially and temporally granular, so you can detect home, workplace, where they visit. This video is going to show you where each person is visiting, and visit is 10 minutes long stay at any kind of location. And the colors here are the estimated income. So we estimate this using the home CBG, estimated home CBG, and overlaying that with the American Community Survey. So red is the lowest income and blue is the highest income. And this is the time. This is 2 a.m. right now, so people are kind of sleeping at their home. And this is 6 a.m. As the day kind of progresses, you start to see a lot of people gathering up in, for example, downtown Boston, Back Bay, MIT. You can see a lot of colors mixing. And but on the other hand, you see places around here, around Boston University, the airport area, where there's only a single color, red. And this is these are the differences in types of, how much diversity do you have in your urban encounters? And so the central question was, where are we segregated, or where are we lacking diversity, and why is that happening? And how we measure segregation and diversity are, the opposite terms I'm going to be using here. Measuring diversity at places, it's very simple. We estimate the visits from GPS pings to this restaurant. We collect all the people who visited this restaurant in a given period, and we get the histogram of the income, lowest income to highest income. And then in an ideal world where everyone mixes with everyone, there's going to be 25% each from these 4 income quantiles. And so that would be 100% diversity. In this case, this restaurant, The Pie, has a lot of visitors from high income people. So this is going to be a little bit segregated or less diverse. And you can play around with this. My collaborator, Esteban Moro, created a dashboard or an interactive web dashboard looking at what kind of places around you are more segregated or diverse. I'm sure there's one in Texas, also Dallas, I think. Houston and Dallas should be there. Please take a look if you're interested. And you can see interesting things like 2 restaurants that are directly across the street have really different mixing. So Chipotle, it tends to have a lot of diverse people coming, the richest to the poorest groups. But then Clover Food Lab, which is a vegetarian Impossible Burger kind of food place, it mainly attracts really high income people. So it doesn't really matter where the place is located at, but these places, even if they're close, they could have really different mixing. So to the paper, so that was previous paper published in Nature Communications back in 2021. And this was a follow-up paper to that, looking at 3 years during the pandemic. And to start from the conclusion, we see that cities have become much less diverse during the pandemic. So these are showing each dot is a place, and the color is showing you the diversity of the place. So blue is more diverse. You can see before the pandemic, it's much more blue. Of course, during the lockdown, it became a lot of red colors. And although it's recovering 1.5 years later from the pandemic or the first lockdown, if you compare closely 2019 April and 2021 October, you see slightly less tone of blue. And if you want to put a number on this, we see that on average, places have become less diverse at 15%. So, and you might think this is quite small, but this is huge because every day when you go to a specific place, on average, you're losing 15% of the diversity you had in terms of encounters. And this is occurring over the 3 years during the pandemic. And I'll talk a little bit at the end, but we assume, or we're expecting this to kind of continue into the new normal that we're living right now. And I'll explain why later. So one hypothesis that we had at the beginning of the study was maybe, yeah, this is because people are, staying home, people are moving around less. And we tested, using mobility data, we can measure all of that. So what we measured was, for example, the number of visits a user typically makes on an average day. Also, the amount of dwell time they spend when they go to a specific place. Those metrics have recovered. So the hypothesis, or the question is the lack of diversity because we are moving around less, doesn't ended up not being true or fully true. It was true during the pandemic or the lockdown periods, but not in the later stages of the pandemic. So I think this is the most kind of technical part of the study. I won't go into much of the details, but I'll try to give you an overview of what we did. So we wanted to get to the bottom of the question of why did these urban encounters become less diverse? And we employed a counterfactual simulation framework where we tested 3 levels of behavioral changes that people could make. So the simple scenario would be, hey, how much diversity would people lose if they reduce total outside activity? For example, during 2020 April, people reduced their activity by 50–60%. How much diversity would people lose if they simply randomly removed their visits from 2019 to the 2020 situation, like 50% reduction? We also know that richer, higher income folks were able to stay at home more. Lower income people had to commute to their workplaces during the pandemic. Also, we know that people reduced their radius of gyration or their travel distances, and started going to places in their neighborhood more. We also know that different types of places had different reduction rates in visits. So taking into all of those factors into consideration and simulating mobility behavior, we calculated how much diversity would we lose if all of those things happened from the baseline 2019 data set. So those are kind of the macroscopic changes that people could have, right? So people reducing mobility, going to closer places, going to parks more than cafes, and richer folks staying at home more. The remainder of the third scenario, or the remainder of the causes of the reduction in diversity is mainly due to these more microscopic changes. So once you decide to move or go to a place, how do you select your place of destination? And as a result of all the simulations, we found that around 55% of the decrease in diversity could be explained by these macroscopic structural changes that occurred in cities. So staying at home more, working from home, going to parks more, things like that. And the remaining 45%, which was quite surprising to us, was due to more of the microscopic behavioral changes that people have started to make and also stuck during and in the latter stages of the pandemic. Right. So the next question was, okay, how did people change their microscopic behavior? And to get to the bottom of this question, we fitted the data to a very classic model that my collaborators at MIT have developed back in 2021, which was built on top of a more classic model built in 2010 by Chaming Song and et al. Yes. It's a simple model where they assume that human mobility is only comprised of 3 main things. One is visiting a new place. Second, if they don't visit a new place, they're going to return to some place they've been to already. And how they select that is determined here. It's called preferential return. And the third dimension of this is once they decide to visit a new place, do they select a place that they are more familiar with, right, or not? So that's called the social exploration. And what we did was we fitted the data across different periods during the pandemic to this model, and we estimated these parameters of the social exploration and preferential return model and see what changed. As a result, what we found was that the social exploration part, so once you decide to go to a new place, do you prefer to go to a place which is full of people like you or people unlike you? And this exploration factor really reduced during the pandemic across different cities. And maybe you can, look back at your lifestyle before and after the pandemic. Certainly from my case, I think before I used to go to random bars, random restaurants more. I think now I'm more of a routine person. So yeah, so that's what the data tells us. And we're trying to look at different interventions, urban interventions, which I don't think I have the time to talk about, but things like transportation interventions to improve the exploration factor here. The other factor was kind of more intuitive. People started doing more going to routine places. So people started to go to more, hardware stores, big box stores like Walmart, banks, and stopped going to gym, fitness, bars, places like and apparel stores, things like that. Just to kind of touch upon a little bit more of the details. So that was across 4 cities, macroscopic analysis. We also dig deeper into what kind of places decrease diversity more than others. And it was interesting to see that during the pandemic increase, the outbreaks, more urban areas tended to have a big impact or bigger decrease in diversity. But in the longer term, for example, late 2021, we see that the decrease in diversity is almost homogeneous. All of the places mostly have homogeneously reduced their diversity. We do a little bit of analysis on policy, the relationship between policy strictness and diversity decrease. So clearly there's a significant correlation negative correlation between the stronger the policy, so more lockdowns, more restrictions on who you can meet and how if you can gather or not, the more decrease you have in diversity. And an interesting thing what we found was, although in late 2021, most of the COVID policies have been lifted, people weren't really wearing masks anymore. There was only kind of these ad campaigns that contributed to this policy stringency index. And although the policies have gone out or been toned down, we still see a decrease in diversity by the late 2021. So this could suggest that this lack of diversity could continue and persist in the new normal. So that's it. That was a really quick run through about the work. If you're interested, this was just published, as Joshin kindly mentioned, last week or a couple weeks ago. And it was also featured in the MIT News, which we were really excited about. So yeah, please take a look. And I've put the QR code. So yeah, this is a summary, 15% decrease in diversity. Why? Of course, we have structural changes in mobility, but also the microscopic behavioral changes contributed a lot as well. And in general, my research doesn't just look at COVID, but I also look at disasters and other urban shocks that change human behavior and affect the local economy. And this is mainly driven by large-scale human behavior data. So if you're interested, please reach out to me or ask a question now. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me first check if there are any questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so everyone, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask directly. I will just get started. So, so remember, a long time ago we had this kind of deep learning on human mobility part, but I see all of your research and many research on nature communication, those are using simple but effective methods.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was doing the deep learning, I feel it's hard to explain and hard to get more insights. I can say we have prediction accuracy. I can say we have this positive, negative edges, but it's hard to explain. So what do you think the opportunity might be for, like, if I want to do a nature communication or route magazine? Is there a preference for deep learning or simple methods?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So if you look in my publication record, I also have papers in KDD or these computer science conferences. So I kind of thought about that for a bit. I'll just say that publishing in Nature Communications isn't the only goal, and there could be a lot of different objectives in research or in publication. So depends on, for example, if you're talking to a company who wants to increase X, then they might not be really interested in the explainability or the understanding or the interpretation, the why. But on the other hand, these kind of interdisciplinary papers, they tend to, in my opinion, they like it when a result is explained. So we observe this and we try to explain why that happens. And we used in this, as you said, we used a very simple method. It's a linear regression. It's nothing very complicated. But I think the other tool that we used was mobility simulations, like counterfactual simulations. I think that was very effective in explaining why diversity decreased. Regression can tell you how diversity decreased. Different demographic groups, different regions. How did they differ? We can explain the heterogeneity, but you don't really understand the why. So the why was a bit different in the sense that we wanted to do these simulations to understand that question. But yeah, I think the preference for these type of journals, the why question is quite valuable.
Or okay, I will ask follow one. So what's your preference? So what do you think a good research should go to? Like, do you think it should go Nature, or do you prefer the readers on the computer science conferences?
I don't know. Personally, I've been shifting more towards these interdisciplinary kind of science journals. Genuinely because it was after some some publishing in KDD, it became quite difficult as I think the most interesting part for me for research is understanding why things happen and why, and especially in urban science or urban policy, you really need to understand the why. Otherwise, it's really hard to convince policymakers or people who do these interventions in cities. And in big data science or these AI kind of urban AI kind of works, transferability of these insights is always an issue. So you train your model on Dallas data, it never works in Boston. But then maybe the insights, the qualitative insights can be transferred. So that's where I started going into more of these computational social science and these nature type journals. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's inspiring.
Thank you.
I see there are two questions in the chat. So first one asks, could you elaborate on how the diversity index and the exploration index were constructed?
Okay. Yeah, the diversity index is quite, let me try to find, there we go. So the diversity index is a very simple index again. So we divide the entire population into 4 income groups, poorest to richest. And then for each, for example, this cafe, different people come to this cafe, spend more time, and rich and poor people come. We calculate how much time different people from different income quintiles spend their time, and as a result, you get something like this, like a bar plot. And I should have put the equation at least here, but it's very simple. It's taking, so an ideal, very diverse place would be 25% each, right? I think explain that. The diversity index is taking the difference, absolute difference between each of these bar plots and the 25% line, and then just adding them up and rescaling it so that diverse would be 1 and not diverse would be 0. On exploration, so exploration, there's many ways to measure it, but a simple way could be out of it's a division. The denominator is how many places you visit, how many new places you visit, how many, the exploration. And the numerator is out of those different new places, how many of them were places that were, the majority was the same income quantile as you. So if you're poor, how much, sorry, exploration, so it's the other way around. So if you're poor, how many of those new places were full of rich people, essentially? So that's kind of how we quantified it. I hope that was clear.
Yes. Second question. Second question is from your reviewer too. So I see that question in your reviewer too. So mass, what is the spatial temporal granularity? How about the positioning accuracy for the POI scale?
Yeah.
And how did you verify your results?
I think you can. I think you were a reviewer too of our paper. Yeah, please go into Nature Communications. They have a peer review report, so you can look at all of the interactions that we had with reviewers, which is quite interesting. So yeah, so the data accuracy is quite high. If I remember correctly, the average error, spatial error, was around 10 meters for a stay. Especially if it's a longer stay, the error becomes smaller. So we assume that all of these places are around that size, and you can quite accurately estimate stays. One comment that we had from reviewers was, hey, what about in high-rise buildings? And that's a very good question. I think it's really, really difficult to estimate accurately how many people go to the second floor or the fifth floor, because we only have the long labs. We did some robustness checks in, for example, what if we remove all of the high-rise buildings from, Boston, Seattle, and look at just the places that are low-rise or the only one-story high, and the results didn't really change. So that was kind of a let off in the sense that maybe including or not including those high-density buildings didn't really affect the results. But in terms of visitation estimations, I'm sure there's the accuracy is going to be pretty hard to get the actual number of visits for those type of places. So yeah, that's how we verified, and we have a very long supplementary material. So please take a look at that.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned you have calculated how many dense area you have, so it's just small portion, and you can kind of ignore the effects there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. And last question here. Hao Yue is my fellow student. She asked if you have any idea why the diversity decreased, and how could we increase the diversity in the future?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So the decrease in why the diversity decreased is in the paper, we find that 50% of it is from the structural changes, working from home, reducing amount of distance they traveled, people traveled, and also the microscopic factors. So less exploration. How we can increase the diversity is something that we're working on with stakeholders like the city of Boston right now. The city of Boston, maybe you read in the newspaper, they're, for example, doing a lot of interventions. For example, there's one bus line called Route 28 coming from the low-income areas to the high-income areas. There's a bus line there, and they're making that fare free. So they're making it free for the people. And the sole purpose of that is to try to bring or bridge those two communities together to increase economic opportunities. And increasing the diversity of their encounters is, of course, one of the biggest metrics that you can measure. And so we're doing a project with them, trying to evaluate the the outcomes of the project. We're seeing good results so far, but I think those kind of urban interventions, urban policy changes could really increase diversity. We didn't put this in the paper, but we also found that changing a big store, so there's a shopping mall called Prudential Center, and it was full of Gucci's and expensive stores. But once they included an Eataly, I don't know if you have Eataly in Texas, but it's a fancy but not too high scale Italian restaurant or Italian food store. That really increased the diversity by 10%. So you can really change, what's in your shopping mall, what are the places that you have in your area, and try to kind of change the dynamics of the city. So those are things that we're interested in and we're working on right now.
I think you also mentioned lots of subcategories change in your research.
Yeah.
I think there are some gym, and you also excluded some like privacy areas maybe. So I don't know if you have planned to analyze those subcategories of places, and you have some excluded places. Do you have like research plan on those places maybe?
Yeah. So subcategories, yeah, that's a great question. We are doing some other work looking at, for example, why did gyms reduce mobility, right? And one hypothesis is maybe they, because people stopped going to work and gyms are closer to workplaces, that's kind of the spatial cascade effect happened. And that's one study that we're doing right now. And hopefully we'll put it on archive soon. So love to have your comments. The sensitive POIs or the places like, churches, we're not allowed to analyze who goes to a church, for example, and for the right reasons. So, and I don't think that's going to change, and that shouldn't change. So we don't have any plans to analyze sensitive POIs at this point.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Is there any more questions from the audience? Yes. If there's no more questions, you'll have Taka's contact information in our website, and he just showed you. And okay, we are right on time. So
okay,
thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you so much. Hope that was interesting.
That was surely very interesting, and
okay.
I'm looking forward to collaborate with you. I look up with you. I really like admire your research and your whole journey. Yeah, so I look up to you. So
yeah, thank you. By the way, I'll be moving to New York University in January as an assistant professor. So yeah, I'll be looking for new collaborations. So please reach out. I'm on LinkedIn or Twitter or email. So
I will surely do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.